It's time to put some spin on the ball. It's bouncing, but it's not turning. Go ahead and select it and grab the rotate tool. Rewind back to frame 1. And we've already got a keyframe on rotate Z on frame 1, frame 24, and frame 48. Let's go back into the graph editor, Window, Animation Editor's Graph Editor, and go to rotate Z. And press the F key, and you'll see that it's a flat line. We don't want or need this center keyframe. We want to rotate in a constant rate of speed. Once again, I'll select that center key and press delete. Additionally, I want to have linear interpolation. I don't want to have a slow in and slow out. So I'll select both of those keys once again and set the tangents to linear. And now I can adjust the value of this AND keyframe to cause the ball to rotate around the Z-axis. Select that keyframe. And up here on the Graph Editor toolbar, you will see statistics. On the left is the selected key's time, its frame number. And on the right is its value. We can enter a value in directly here. So let's go to the last frame in our timeline so we can see this. So I'll scrub down to frame 48. There's the ball. And I can put in a value for that selected keyframe. I could say rotate 90 degrees. And when I do that, we can see the ball rotated. Let's take a look at that. Go back to the graph editor and click in the main window and press the F key to frame that curve. And now we can see that we've got a slope here. We can also interactively adjust. Let's zoom out a little bit. Alt and right mouse. And select that key. And if we're parked on that same frame that we're editing, in this case frame 48, then we can observe the results in the viewports. So with that selected, I can grab the Move tool and position this so we can see the ball. Hold down the Shift key because we only want to change the value of the keyframe. We don't want to change its time. Holding Shift will constrain the movement either vertically or horizontally depending upon which direction you drag. Hold down Shift and then click and drag up and down. You can see the ball rotating. So if I bring this up a lot to something like 300 and something degrees, the ball will completely turn. So we'll minimize that and rewind and see what it looks like. And you'll see it's turning, but it's spinning in the wrong direction. Go back to the graph editor. Park at the last frame here. Just fast forward to the last keyframe here by clicking on this button. I'll just advance to the next keyframe. Go back to the graph editor. Press the F key. Zoom out a little bit more. Position that. And with the Move tool, hold down Shift and drag downward. And now we're causing it to spin in the opposite direction by, let's say, about 400 degrees. Minimize the graph editor. All right, and now it's spinning in the direction that we want it to. Okay, so we've got rotations working. Now we want to add squash and stretch. Let's position the timeline at the point of impact here. That's frame 24. And we're going to add a deformer. And that's going to allow the squash and stretch effect to preserve the volume of the ball. If we just tried to scale the ball, it wouldn't work because it would actually change size. So what we want is for, as we scale up in one axis, we scale down in the other two axes. With the ball selected and our timeline parked on frame 24, go up into the menu sets and choose Animation. And from the menus, go to Create Deformers, Nonlinear, Squash. And now we've got a new icon here. It's the squash handle. We want to select that handle. Click on it. And then tap the space bar. We'll go out to our 4 viewport layout. Let's dolly in the front view and the perspective view so we can get a little bit better sense of what we're working with here. The squash handle is not aligned with the world right away. We are going to want to rotate it. But first, let's see what it looks like when we adjust its squash factor. With that squash handle selected, go to its input nodes, squash 1, and you'll see factor. Select that name, and then middle mouse, click and drag left to right in any view. We can adjust the squash factor. All right, now that is independent of the rotation of the ball. Just to illustrate, if I select the ball and select the rotate tool, I can turn the ball, but it's always going to squash in the same direction according to the orientation of the squash handle. By the way, I'm not changing my animation here. Just because I'm rotating the object, that doesn't affect the animation because it has keyframes on it. If I just scrub in the timeline here, it'll go back to the orientation that it had before. Okay, now what we want to do here is rotate that squash handle so that it's oriented square to the world. So let's select it. Go ahead and click on that squash handle. And over here you'll see Rotate Z has a non-zero value. Just set that to 0 and press Enter. And now with the squash rotate value set to 0, the squash effect is perpendicular to the ground plane. So we can play around with this a little bit more. Go back into the squash input node, and we have the low and high boundaries. That'll change the shape of the squash effect. If I select low bound and middle mouse drag, you can see what it's doing. We can constrain that squash to only be in a certain area. I want to increase that a little bit. I'm going to set low bound to, let's say, -2, and high bound to, let's say, +2. So it's symmetrical. And the last thing we want to do here is to parent the squash handle to the ball, so that as the ball rotates, the squash handle will rotate too. Now it's oriented the way it needs to be at the point of impact. What we want it to do from now on is to follow the rotations of the ball. So we'll link or parent the squash handle to the ball. Let's use the select tool to do that. First, we want to select the thing that is going to be the follower or the child, and that's the squash handle. So select the squash handle. Make sure you don't select anything else. And then hold down Shift and select the ball, and that will be the parent. And you can use the edit command here, edit parent, or just use the P key on the keyboard. It's lowercase p. So I'll just press P. And now the squash handle is parented to the ball. And if I scrub in the timeline, you will see that it's following the ball now. All right, it's time to save once again. File, increment, and save.